Composure is often the most underrated weapon in high-stakes confrontations. When faced with public criticism or personal attacks, the immediate instinct for many is to react, quickly, emotionally, and sometimes recklessly. But true strength lies not in the speed of the response, but in the control behind it. A measured reaction forces the audience to focus on the substance of the words rather than the heat of the moment. It shifts the power dynamic, putting the aggressor in an awkward position. They've thrown a punch, only to find their opponent standing perfectly still, unshaken, and ready to respond with precision. This kind of restraint isn't passivity. It's strategy. In politics, media, or even everyday conflicts, the person who maintains their poise controls the narrative. Emotional reactions can be spun, twisted, or dismissed as irrational. But a calm, deliberate reply? That lingers. It forces observers to weigh the words themselves, rather than getting distracted by the spectacle of anger. People remember composure because it's rare, especially in environments designed to provoke outbursts. There's also a psychological advantage to staying collected under fire. When one side escalates with insults or aggression, they expect, even rely on, an equal or greater reaction. Denying them that satisfaction disrupts their entire approach. Instead of a shouting match or a war of sound bites, the exchange becomes one-sided in an unexpected way. The attacker looks unhinged, while the composed party appears authoritative. The contrast speaks for itself. Beyond perception, composure allows for clarity of thought. In the seconds between an insult and a response, the choice to pause and think, rather than lash out, opens the door for a more impactful counter. A well-structured rebuttal delivered with steady conviction cuts deeper than a hasty comeback. It signals that the person isn't just defending themselves, they're making a deliberate point. That kind of intentionality commands respect, even from adversaries. Ultimately, composure isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about channeling it effectively. The most memorable moments in debates, interviews, or public confrontations aren't the loudest or the most dramatic. They're the ones where someone, against all pressure, chooses to respond with unshakable calm, and in doing so, leaves everyone else speechless. Timing is everything in confrontation. The difference between a forgettable exchange and a moment that resonates lies not just in what is said, but when it's said. A rushed comeback often falls flat. It feels reactive, defensive, even desperate. But a response that lands at just the right moment carries weight. It lingers in the air, giving the audience time to absorb it, turning a simple rebuttal into something far more potent. The art of timing isn't about hesitation, it's about precision. Waiting for the right beat ensures the words hit with maximum impact, transforming a retort into a defining statement. Consider how silence can be weaponized in a debate. A pause after an insult, even just a fraction of a second longer than expected, creates tension. It signals that the response won't be dictated by the aggressor's tempo. That momentary hold forces everyone to lean in, to anticipate. When the reply finally comes, it isn't lost in the noise. It stands alone, sharp and deliberate. This kind of timing isn't accidental. It's a calculated choice to disrupt the rhythm of the confrontation and seize control of it. There's also power in choosing when not to engage. Not every provocation deserves a response, and recognizing which battles to ignore is as crucial as knowing which to fight. Some insults are designed solely to bait a reaction. Answering them only plays into the opponent's hands. But when a response is necessary, delivering it at the optimal moment, after the initial wave of heat has passed, or just when the audience's attention is peaking, ensures it won't be drowned out by the chaos of the exchange. Timing also dictates how an audience perceives intent. A well-placed retort can reframe the entire encounter. For instance, responding too quickly might make the comeback seem rehearsed or petty, but allowing a beat of silence before speaking suggests thoughtfulness, turning the reply into a statement rather than just a reaction. It shifts the dynamic from defense to offense, subtly implying that the person isn't just parrying a blow, but making a deliberate point. This nuance changes how the moment is remembered, not as a squabble, but as a decisive pivot. The cultural weight of timing can't be overlooked either. In an era of rapid-fire social media and soundbite politics, patience is a rare commodity. A response that arrives too late might miss the moment entirely, but one that's timed perfectly can dominate the narrative for days. It's the difference between adding to the noise and cutting through it. The right words at the right time don't just answer an attack, they reframe the conversation, forcing everyone else to react on your terms. Mastering timing requires both discipline and instinct. It means resisting the urge to fill silence immediately, to let the pressure build just enough before releasing the perfect counter. It's knowing that the most powerful replies aren't the fastest, they're the ones that land exactly when they'll be heard the loudest. The most powerful responses transcend the immediate sting of an insult and redirect the conversation toward something more meaningful. When faced with personal attacks or petty jabs, the instinctive reaction is often to respond in kind, to match the tone and tenor of the provocation. But this approach traps you in your opponent's framework, reducing the exchange to a battle of egos rather than ideas. The far more effective strategy is to elevate the discourse, to pivot from the personal to the substantive. By refusing to engage on shallow ground and instead steering the discussion toward real issues, you force observers to weigh the actual stakes rather than getting distracted by theatrics. This kind of redirection requires both quick thinking and emotional discipline. In the heat of a public confrontation, it's tempting to take the bait, to defend your pride or reputation in the moment. But the truly impactful rebuttal recognizes that some insults aren't worth acknowledging directly. Instead, it uses the attack as a springboard to address larger truths. For example, rather than dignifying a baseless personal dig with a denial, you might highlight how such tactics are used to distract from policy failures or systemic problems. This approach doesn't just neutralize the insult, it exposes the weakness behind it. There's an inherent power imbalance in these exchanges that works in favor of the person who stays focused on substance. When one party trades in insults and the other responds with thoughtful commentary, the contrast becomes glaring. The audience begins to see the former as unserious, while the latter gains credibility simply by maintaining focus on what actually matters. This dynamic is particularly potent in political or media environments where viewers are increasingly fatigued by empty spectacle. People may initially be drawn to conflict, but they remember and respect those who rise above it to say something meaningful. The substance over soundbite approach also has a compounding effect over time. While flashy comebacks might win momentary applause, they rarely leave a lasting impression. By contrast, consistently elevating the conversation builds a reputation for thoughtfulness and integrity. Audiences start to associate your voice with substantive discussion rather than petty squabbles. This perception becomes a form of credibility that can't be manufactured through clever one-liners alone. When people know you'll address the real issues rather than get dragged into mudslinging, they're more likely to listen when you speak. This strategy also deprives provocateurs of what they want most, a reaction they can exploit. Personal attacks are often designed to elicit an emotional response that can be clipped, memed, or taken out of context. By instead pivoting to substantive points, you deny them that opportunity. The insult becomes a footnote rather than the focus, and the conversation moves to territory where you have the advantage. This doesn't mean ignoring attacks entirely, it means choosing how and where to engage on your own terms. Perhaps most importantly, substance resonates because it connects to people's actual concerns. While audiences might be momentarily entertained, by verbal sparring, what they truly care about are the issues affecting their lives. A response that speaks to those concerns, that uses the platform created by the confrontation to address real problems, will always carry more weight than the cleverest insult. It demonstrates that you understand the moment isn't about scoring points, but about speaking to what matters. In an age of endless noise, that kind of clarity stands out. Mastering this approach requires preparation as much as quick thinking. It means having a firm grasp of the substantive issues so you can pivot to them seamlessly. It demands the emotional intelligence to recognize when you're being baited and the discipline to resist, and it calls for the rhetorical skill to make that pivot feel natural rather than evasive. When executed well, This strategy doesn't just win the immediate exchange, it elevates the entire discourse, setting the terms for how future confrontations will be judged. The true measure of a response isn't how effectively it puts down an opponent, but how successfully it advances the conversation. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a clever retort or a well-argued rebuttal. It's the deafening silence that follows a statement so sharp it leaves an entire room frozen. There's a unique power in crafting words that don't just answer an opponent, but momentarily suspend the very atmosphere around them. This phenomenon occurs when a response is so precisely calibrated, so surgically aimed at the core of an issue, that it creates a vacuum where no immediate comeback seems possible. The room holds its breath, the cameras keep rolling, social media pauses before erupting. In that suspended moment, the weight of what was said settles over everyone present, and the balance of the exchange shifts irrevocably. This effect doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of understanding that communication isn't just about the words themselves, but about controlling the space around them. Most public confrontations follow predictable rhythms: insult and response, attack and counterattack, creating a back and forth that audiences have been conditioned to expect. But when someone breaks that rhythm with a statement that can't be immediately categorized or countered, it creates cognitive dissonance. Listeners need a moment to process what they just heard. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. The speaker gains complete control of the narrative. The silence isn't just absence of noise, it's active space being claimed. The psychology behind this phenomenon reveals why it's so potent. Human brains are wired to seek resolution, to fill gaps in conversation with expected patterns. When those patterns are disrupted by a response that doesn't fit conventional confrontation templates, one that's neither defensive nor aggressively offensive, but something entirely different, it triggers a heightened state of attention. People lean forward. They stop scrolling. They replay the moment in their minds. This cognitive engagement makes the message stick far more than any shouted insult or rehearsed talking point ever could. The silence becomes part of the message itself, amplifying its impact. There's also an element of theatricality at work, though not in the performative sense. The best of these moments don't feel staged, they feel inevitable, as if the speaker simply stated an obvious truth that everyone else had been avoiding. When a response exposes some fundamental hypocrisy or lays bare an uncomfortable reality, the resulting silence comes from collective recognition. No one can immediately rebut because the statement has, even temporarily, collapsed the usual defenses. This is particularly true when the response reframes the entire confrontation, making the original insult seem small by comparison. The audience isn't just hearing a comeback, they're witnessing a perspective shift in real time. The cultural context magnifies this effect in our current media landscape. We live in an era of constant noise, where every controversy sparks an instant flood of reactions, hot takes, and manufactured outrage. In this environment, a moment of genuine, unscripted silence stands out precisely because it's so rare. It cuts through the predictable back and forth that audiences have grown tired of, creating what media theorists call an earworm moment, something that replays in viewers' minds long after the event. This explains why certain responses go viral not just for what was said, but for how the world seemed to pause afterward. Mastering this level of communication requires more than wit. It demands an understanding of human psychology, media dynamics, and the unspoken rules of confrontation. It means recognizing that the most powerful statements often work like judo throws, using an opponent's energy against them without matching their tone. It involves knowing exactly where to apply pressure, so that a response doesn't just answer an attack, but fundamentally alters the terms of engagement. And perhaps most crucially, it requires the confidence to let the silence do its work, to resist the impulse to fill the space with additional justification or emphasis. The after effects of such moments reveal their true power. In the immediate aftermath, there's often a scramble, by opponents to regroup, by commentators to explain, by the public to dissect what just happened. The response becomes a reference point, its phrasing analyzed, its delivery studied, but more importantly, it changes how future interactions are approached. When someone demonstrates the ability to deliver a silencing response, it raises the stakes for would-be provocateurs. They think twice before engaging, knowing they might not just be countered, but stopped cold. This deterrent effect gives the speaker more control over subsequent exchanges before they even begin. Ultimately, these moments remind us that real communication power lies not in volume or velocity, but in impact. In a world where everyone is shouting, the words that make people stop and listen, really listen, are the ones that endure. They reset expectations about what constitutes effective discourse. They prove that sometimes the most profound statement is the one that, after being delivered, needs no follow-up at all. The silence isn't just reaction, it's recognition of something that can't be immediately answered, only absorbed. And in that absorption lies the true victory. The most memorable confrontations in public discourse aren't defined by who shouted loudest or landed the harshest insult. They're remembered for who made the room stand still. These rare moments reveal an uncomfortable truth about power, dynamics. True influence isn't seized through force, but through the strategic use of silence, precision, and the willingness to let uncomfortable truths hang in the air. When a response is so perfectly calibrated that it suspends the usual rhythms of conflict, it exposes how fragile most performative disputes really are. The silence that follows isn't just absence. It's the sound of an opponent's narrative collapsing under its own weight. In our era of perpetual outrage and manufactured controversies, these instances stand out precisely because they defy expectations. We've been conditioned to expect and even crave the dopamine hit of a fiery back and forth, the predictable spectacle of traded barbs. But when someone disrupts that cycle with a response that can't be easily categorized or countered, it creates a rupture in the script. The audience, momentarily freed from their role as spectators to a predetermined drama, becomes acutely aware they're witnessing something authentic. This explains why such moments reverberate far beyond their initial context. They offer a fleeting glimpse of uncalculated truth in an age of curated personas. The aftermath of these exchanges often reveals more about our cultural moment than the confrontation itself. The frantic attempts to spin, meme, or water down the significance of a silencing response only highlight its potency. Pundits dissect the phrasing, partisans scramble to claim victory, and social media fractures into endless debate. But none of this changes the visceral impact of that initial collective pause. That moment of silence becomes a Rorschach test. Some hear a mic drop, others hear an uncomfortable truth being acknowledged, and a few simply hear what they fear most, a challenge to their worldview that can't be immediately dismissed. What makes these responses endure isn't their cleverness or their burn value, but their ability to expose the emptiness of so much public discourse. They reveal how many conflicts are sustained not by genuine disagreement, but by the mutual agreement to keep playing roles in a tired script. When someone steps off that stage and speaks with clarity that can't be easily commodified into sound bites, it creates cognitive dissonance. The resulting silence is the sound of that dissonance settling, the pause before people decide whether to engage with the substance or retreat back into comfortable patterns. Ultimately, these moments matter, because they prove that even in our hyper-mediated world, authenticity still has weight. The right words at the right time, delivered with conviction rather than calculation, can still cut through the noise. They remind us that real communication isn't about scoring points. It's about creating moments where people stop pretending, if only for a few seconds. And in that suspension of performance, something rare and valuable emerges: the possibility of being genuinely heard. That possibility is what lingers long after the applause fades or the outrage moves on. The quiet, understanding that for one brief moment, the usual games didn't work.